You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and we're here today in this episode to talk a little bit about the digital organizational structure, the operations, the setting it up, the current state of it in the market. And I've got a great friend over at John Feather, he's been part of the network for a while now, been at a variety of organizations, Fortune 500, and now has gotten into a consultancy role. And I was chatting with him a few weeks back around some of the struggles that pop up right now as, people try to figure out their digital organizations. The past couple of years, a lot of money's been thrown at it, and rightfully so. But now we're getting to a point in time, current state of the economy, where people are taking a hard look at, hey, what's really working and what's not. And so John, thanks for jumping on today. I'll kind of kick it over to you. If you want to do a brief intro
Sure.
on yourself and current organization, that'd be awesome. And then we can kind of jump into the content. Sound good?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm John Feather. Like you said, I'm consulting now with a group called HHF Strategy. My background is really based in CPG brand management, but with a much less traditional pre-business experience, and I would say a less traditional, even CPG brand management experience. So before business, I was managing oncology clinical trials in Boston, and then followed my wife into getting into business school at Washington University in St. Louis, and then went into brand management, first with Kimberly Clark, and then moving over to SC Johnson, and ultimately, most recently, moved out of CPG, but within that brand management, general management function at a company called Hawthorne Gardening Company, which is cannabis growing equipment. But what makes that kind of the less traditional path was at SC Johnson, I spent a couple of years as a change leader for the global e-commerce team. Responsible for bringing up not just the global organization, but individual country teams all around the world, either improving their ability to execute in e-commerce or building it from the ground up. And we realized very quickly when our team was formed that we needed to be able to tell those teams what their structure would look like, how their teams were going to work together, what they were going to do to establish an e-commerce capability, and ultimately answer the final question of, okay, so how do I do this with no money?
Yeah, so I want to jump in there because that's where a lot of people are at right now, which is they've got a digital organization, or they at least started it. And the way that got started was, if you go pre-pandemic, oh, isn't that cute? There's a little spot over here in the corner. Why don't you play around a little bit, but don't spend too much money? The pandemic hits and they're like, okay, executive team says we need an e-commerce or a digital division, set it up. And people raise their hand or they don't raise their hand, or recruiters go out at a time when everybody went to their LinkedIn profile and just put digital in front of whatever their title was.
Yes.
And then they hired a bunch of people in and they're like, hey, we did it. We've got a digital team. If you unwind that, how should people at this point in time, how should you think about building that team? Right? What is that? Rather than just saying, oh, this is a team, it's a group, and it sits over in the corner.
Yes.
Right?
So
how do you look at it?
I always look at it first. First thing is always, realize that our company is going to be consumer first. That's how any company is going to succeed, by thinking about your consumer. So what that means here is recognize where your consumer is shopping and where do they want to shop. And we know, even before pandemic, but after pandemic, that's online. So it starts by recognizing that what you do with that kind of recognition is build that capability into the fabric of your company. And you do that what that concept essentially means first is, think about if you are a Kimberly Clark or a CPG company, Walmart, the ability to execute and get a product on the shelf at Walmart and sell it at Walmart, you don't even have to talk about it. Every step from consumer need, packaging, the product, you know that you are ultimately going to have something that you can sell into Walmart because everybody understands aspects of executing in Walmart. Now it's time to build in e-commerce because it's not going to diminish in any way whatsoever. And so it's okay. So we're going to execute in e-commerce. If you have an e-commerce organization, that's great. That's awesome. Their role needs to be recognized as driving that change that builds it into the fabric of the company, not as the team that does e-commerce. So the way I kind of describe what, if we need a dedicated e-commerce team, the best place that I found in any team to put it is within the marketing organization, because strategy typically starts with the brand team, and you want the leadership of the strategy to have the same to have that view of how the entire organization is going to be able to execute that strategy.
Yeah, really quick. It's unique because I think a lot of people, so what you're saying is when you're hiring, you're building it out, that focus of the e-com team is in two areas, right? There is hey, how do we get it up and going if it's in marketing, wherever it falls, right? Yep. How do we get the products up? How do we get the fulfillment? How do we get everything set away, the content, the paid media, everything behind it? But at the same time, they need to have a focus of driving the integration of e-commerce into the rest of the company.
Yes.
And if that's the case, then I'm also looking at, if I'm hiring, that changes a little bit the questions I'm asking in an interview, right? Yes. And what I'm giving to, if I have to go to a recruiting agency or I'm working with my HR department, is specifically looking for people that not only know how to execute in the digital space and know it really well, but people who know and are comfortable with driving change internally at a company. And do they have the right skill set, right, to convince people internally that, hey, this is a new way of looking at it. And while the next 6 months might be really hard, 7 months from now, your life's going to be a ton easier and the company is going to be better.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I did a lot of research when I was first kind of building our framework at SC Johnson, but I've also gotten a lot of experience executing it both with our different teams around the world at SC Johnson. I mean, from throughout South America and throughout Asia, in how we select that talent. One of the most common things that you find both in research and in success is that unless you don't have this person, one of the best ways to fill that position is with an internal hire. It's not necessarily about their prior e-commerce experience. It's somebody that fits two descriptors. They understand how the company works and they love learning, because somebody who loves learning is going to reach out to BWG, learn how this stuff works. Aaron, this is how I learned half of my stuff was working with you. People who they will learn e-commerce. The hardest thing is driving change within an organization. And so somebody who understands your organization or has that ability. So, if you're hiring externally, somebody who understands how an organization works, they are going to be the best person to drive change, then, within
So
that,
you're saying then, so when
yeah,
people are hiring, right? But this happens all the time, right? It happens all the time is you have the internal person who applies,
yes,
but because you haven't been a digitally driven or digitally focused company, they actually don't have the skill set, the digital skill set, but they may
right,
have the internal, they're well-known, well-respected. Maybe they're a project manager, they've gotten along, they've delivered, they're constantly learning, they're taking new things on. And then comes up a digital role. And initially, what almost always happens is when that interview goes out, they err on the side of the person who's external, who has the digital knowledge, and they appreciate, we'll say,
yes,
the actual skill set this internal person has. And
yes,
it's not to say that one is always better than the other, but one is almost always underappreciated. And so if you're a hiring manager today and you do find that person and they are, committed to learning, continuous learning, and they are well known and they are open to trying, that might be better than somebody who's run performance marketing at 3 other companies and really knows paid media well.
Exactly. You are going to be able to find the person who, already knows everybody in the company, knows how to sell in ideas, knows what drives objectives and change for each of the different functions. And like you said, those people can exist externally, but it can be difficult to find the right person, because what typically happens is a company says, okay, I need an e-commerce expert, hire me somebody who was on the Amazon team or on the, Tmall team at another company, or they worked for Amazon. Well, you're typically going to find people who are really passionate about executing on those platforms. When you bring them in and scope their position and the reality hits them that this is a change agent job first, it can be really, you really have to hope that you got the right person. And let's be honest, depending on the company, it may be really hard to find that right person, per se, especially when you think of where those jobs usually exist that you're going to pull from, and where your company may be located. I know that early in Kimberly Clark days, we had some leadership that said we're gonna get great talent from Amazon, and then the reality hit. Oh, Amazon employees make twice what we expected to pay in rural Wisconsin. But if we want to draw them to rural Wisconsin, we're going to have to even pay more than that.
Right.
And so there's so many difficulties with finding that right person. And then once they are in the organization, making sure that they love what they do enough to stay and really build that capability into the company. And they do exist. We have at SC Johnson, the European team hired a gentleman named Iraj who's phenomenal at both things. But we also hired people in other countries, and the change agent job was not their passion.
Right. But I think that how you put it as change agent is something that is really, really, really important at this point in time. You could get away with it for the past few years, just because so much was going in digital, like everybody was growing. But if you look at it right now, I mean, kind of, I talk with 20 or 30 brands a week, and it seems like towards the end of June, traffic started to drop. If we first look at a direct consumer side, conversions the same. And there's a lot of conversations I'm having. Conversions were the same, which means your website's not broke, right? It wasn't something wrong with it. It was just there's fewer shoppers out there now with everything that's going on with Amazon, cutting, dropping off, how many weeks of cover they want to carry. It's getting a lot more difficult to try to grow a digital business. And you have a lot more people going in the store. And so you get to this point where, okay, if there's not as much to do on the direct to consumer or the Amazon side, how are we enabling digital, which that's literally how people thought of e-commerce, right? Yep. Is, hey, how are we going to grow Amazon or direct to consumer site, or maybe Walmart.com if you're in CPG. And now it's, hey, how are we going to leverage all of this technology to help drive sales across the board? Maybe it's on the back end, updating your ERP for individual pick, pack, ship. Maybe it's changing, adding a B2B option on your website. And that's a different skill set than just doing Amazon paid media.
Exactly. And you touched on so many things, but I want to continue two of them. The first is that even when once it's built into the company, things and understand things like Amazon business may decline as brick and mortar increases, but there's still a crucial role for your product page that that most likely has not changed unless it continues to grow in importance. And that's, we know in the US, we usually hear something like 50 to 55% of consumers will pull up an Amazon page at the shelf when they're considering a new product they've never tried before. So that when people are going into the store, your online content on your website or on Amazon still crucial. And if you're not in the US, that can be even higher. I believe the stats when I was working with the Southeast Asia team was that the Philippines was closer to 90% of consumers checking Tmall or another source in store because they had to be very careful with their money. And the team was blown away. They would have assumed it was much less than the US, much lower instance than the US.
Sure.
So it remains super important. But also what you were saying about Amazon changing, wanting to, change how much inventory they're carrying, because we saw, I know personally, we saw certain categories just drop off for reasons we couldn't explain. And Amazon was stuck with inventory. We're stuck with inventory. We don't want to take it back from Amazon, but they certainly don't want to be carrying it. When your supply chain org is really passionate and experienced in dealing with e-commerce, they're much more capable of adjusting than if you just kind of had a team, had a customer team. Even if you had a customer supply chain leader, if the whole supply chain org was not oriented with them, then adjusting to those changes is hard. And those changes happen all the time. They can happen category by category. We had very different requirements between different categories in both businesses I've worked at. And that agility is so important.
Yeah. It's funny because I think about all the opportunities for, I don't know, it's almost like therapy sessions at times, right? So digital marketers can come together and just realize what's going on and how much their job has changed over the past few years. But there aren't as many on like the supply chain side, right?
It's
the
true.
Logistics side, where the finance side, if you think about the finance teams and everything that goes on with chargebacks on Amazon, or the tax issues that come up with if you're doing direct to consumer, the IT side, you've got to update, like I was saying, your ERP systems to individual pick, pack, ship. Now you're asking the supply chain team or the logistics team to go back and kit or bundle or do drops or do inserts when they're used to LTL and full truckload.
Yeah, exactly. Honestly, we were fortunate at SC Johnson to tap an amazing gentleman who his solution, as you stated, there wasn't that kind of group for supply chain. He reached out to his friends that had moved on from SC Johnson to other companies, and he made one. And they started out not really knowing anything, but they fit that mold of they love learning. and they're joining each other simply because that was what made them friends, friends in their function before. And they became, amazing. We could bring issues to that group that had been working and talking about e-commerce for 6 months, but they had figured out so much because, each of them had 6 months, but you're talking to 10 people who had different experiences in 6 months.
Yeah. That's where, on our side, on the BWG Connect side, we're going to do 104 in-person small format dinners this year, 15 to 20 people around a table, just hashing it out. And that's the most we've ever done. And that's just demand from the network as a whole. Like, we can't learn enough at this point in time. And we don't learn as much at the huge events like we used to. I was just at Amazon Unboxed, and that was a highly scripted event. We did 2 dinners outside of it. People just wanted to get together and hash through, hey, what's really going on in digital as a whole.
Yeah.
But I want to go back because Amazon Unboxed is top of mind, and digital marketing as a whole. And
yes.
you had made the comment that it seems like digital, the best fit for it right now is in marketing.
Yes.
And I don't disagree. I really don't. I kicked off my digital career in IT though, because it was too disruptive, right? To either marketing or sales, and still was able to actually was the best spot at the time because IT resources are always short. But if you're in IT, maybe you can be at the top of the list for launching a direct to consumer site. But when you look at, I just remember back to launching on Amazon, you go out there and they're like, we'll take everything. Like, traditionally the sell-in process is the hardest, right? That's traditionally it. You've got to unseat somebody from the store shelf and prove that you're going to make more money. And so it's all about the sell-in. And then after that, it gets a little bit easier, but Amazon takes everything. There's an endless digital shelf. And so it really comes to the next, which is the marketing side. How are you presenting the product? But would love to hear your thoughts there.
So like I said, I have found that it tends to be the best in marketing, but with a caveat, which is sometimes it's who's going to make it happen. And a lot of times that can start in sales and eventually move over to marketing. But here's the reason that I like to place it in marketing. As I mentioned, making it part of the fabric of your company, making sure that every single person is advancing their knowledge along with the needs of their roles. You got to build the foundation for the future. And when you think about building a business in e-commerce and making sure that it's going to be sustainable and profitable, you want somebody who understands assortment strategy, consumer and customer pricing. And also, you're going to want to be able to combine the discussion of budgeting media in the whole funnel. So that discussion is very difficult and almost guaranteed to waste money if somebody does not have the full picture of the entire media budget. And that's why putting it within the marketing organization tends to work best. What we often find when that doesn't happen is the marketing team creates a marketing mix with their agent, with their media buying agency. Then the customer team works with, they either work themselves, depending on how big they are, they have a flywheel, something like that. And you end up with 2 different budgets. Sometimes they end up overlapping and you're competing with each other. But what you're also never going to get is the full picture of the results you're getting for your ANCP. And then, you just don't have that foundation to continue to grow, use money efficiently, and give a consistent picture to the consumer.
Yeah, what do you see from the, we just doing an event with big pizza brand, big shoe brand, and both have retail and online, and we got into a cool discussion around the tech on the back end. Yeah. And so often tech is so focused on the consumer and not necessarily on the employee, right? Yes. The actual people who are working for you, right? And where does the technology piece fall? Because I can think from a digital marketing standpoint, I'm thinking about maybe it's my paid media agency, maybe I'm picking the right, Amazon paid media tool, or, direct consumer, what email, what SMS, right? Returns, whatever module I want, who's the best supplier there. But when we talk about digital transformation, like that's one part of it, right? The biggest part is getting the organization internally to adopt new technology that helps advance it. Where does that fall?
Yeah, that's why, first of all, it's why we hire a change agent, because if they have an internal IT organization, or if they're going to go outside, to your point, it needs to be employee focused. So you're going to ultimately have to discuss how to have a digital asset management system if that doesn't exist, how to have the product information management system, so your DAM and your PIM, and have them, the best thing, be able to integrate those into your syndication, your syndication software or platform, and all of that. By doing all of that, you will, as you said, you're basically making the consumer of these platforms the employee, make their life easier, and make them, by making their life easier, they're going to make it easier to get a consumer to buy the product. And that's really, again, it goes back to that key thing of we hire a change agent so that they can work with the IT organization to bring these in. And it can be selling new technologies. But when we recognize that our job is to put the consumer first, have leadership lead with a consumer first strategy, and make sure that includes executing where a consumer wants to buy the product, those foundations, and those are always the first things that I tell an organization is, I need to have leadership tell the entire organization we're doing this, and then back it up with continuing to incorporate it into business reviews, asking for things like all outlet share. When you have set that high level strategy and communicated it, selling in those new technologies becomes a lot easier, because I can link it back to the objective that you've set for the organization. So I know it doesn't seem like it's IT focused, but that answer, but I'll give you an example. An amazing leader that I worked with at Kimberly Clark was known for being very passionate. She would come in and sometimes, have done what we all do. We see something in the marketplace and we say, hey, we should do that. And usually when she said that, she wanted you to talk her down. Explain why we aren't doing that. She walked in one day and said, Amazon will be a top 5 customer for Huggies before the end of the year. And it was maybe like below 10. This was years ago. So she walked in and said that one day, and her direct reports, she could feel them kind of like that move forward to talk her down. And she goes, do not attempt to talk me down from this one. Consumers are shopping there. They're going to shop there more, make it happen. When leadership was that clear, when those marketing leaders worked with IT and came back with the roadmap to efficiently achieve both digital marketing, e-commerce content, it made sense to everybody. And then we get into the other piece that always makes sure that something will become organizational, which is if you can align objectives between functions to the common goals, it also makes those things easier and really reduces friction. So IT has a reason to talk to you, because as you mentioned, IT is always short-staffed, but they also always have 1,000 things to do. And being at the top of their list is very difficult for very good reason. When you align their objectives and include e-commerce and digital marketing in that, it makes sense to IT. It will make sense to sell in and spend that money where it's needed.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues just companies have had is the executives at the top don't have the in-depth understanding of digital that's required at this point in time. Not that they never will. It's just they're running a company, and e-commerce came around so quickly and it's changing so fast. Unless you're living in it in the day-to-day, right? You can't stay on top of it. And therefore it's hard to understand everything. Like you're saying, when somebody comes, hey, actually, we need a PIM, we need a DAM, we need content syndication. Oh, by the way, we need to re-platform. We want to go headless. We need to add payment options. Oh, by the way, we're touching, SAP. Oh, by the way, we're changing. We need to integrate a new 3PL that can individually, pick, pack, ship for us because our team can. It's like peppered with all these different things. So a lot of times for a leader to jump in and say, we're 100% here, it's just been a lot more difficult for them to do that because they don't understand what 100% all that, we're here, we need to do this, what it even means. They don't know what they're giving carte blanche to. And so they've been a little hesitant. I think this breather we're going to get, post Q4 here is going to allow I think we're going to see a lot of shakeup. That's what I think. We're going to see a lot of shakeup and a lot of realigning of goals. So,
to advance that conversation on when leadership, doesn't have that time or they have different experience than, the lower levels of employees, there are two things that I love to recommend there. One is if you can estimate or calculate all outlet share, you start to talk to the ultimate objective that any leadership has, which is the company P&L. Because if you avoid or can't speak to all outlet share, you cannot provide them with the explanation of why these things are business critical. Because especially if you're in a large company where 1 to 2% growth is awesome, it is very difficult to understand that maybe the company achieved that through a price increase. But if we look at all outlet share, we now start to include Amazon share or the estimates of click and collect share from our brick and mortar partners. You start to see how much share you're going to basically, agree not to address simply by not doing this. And then we're appealing to the leadership objectives and the ultimate organizational objectives. In addition to that, the best way we would sell in kind of the function of those investments is to speak about it in terms of their experience. So one of the greatest things you can do is talk about e-commerce in terms of putting an item on the shelf at brick and mortar. So we need to be able to do content in digital marketing and e-commerce. In brick and mortar, that's like packaging. Our packaging, the way packaging works is changing. We have to be able to do it. That's this content. Without this, it's like we don't have packaging to put an item on the shelf. Digital media. If we don't have digital media, it's like we can't do any shopper marketing at Walmart. So we can put something on the shelf, but if somebody's coming into the store, we can't get them to our product on the shelf. Those kinds of discussions have usually helped our very senior leaders really snap in and understand. And then there's this was my silver bullet, especially with teams. We did a conference years ago with members of leadership and sales organizations from every South American team at SC Johnson. And Rappi, which is kind of like an Instacart in South America, was really just kind of coming onto the scene for them. And what was, the usual challenge is that's 1% of my business. My silver bullet was always, okay, that's fine. If that's 1% of your business, I understand. Now, when we get to the end of the year and your account has declined by 1%, you're still going to be good on your objectives, your evaluation, your bonus, right? Nope. If I decline 1%, I'll probably get fired. Cool. So let's grow 1% instead of lose it. And though, not that statement did everything, but that group of people still gets together once a year, and they are some like that Rappi account for Chile, Argentina, Colombia went from 0 to like 3% of their accounts, and they grew even while their peer companies, peer brands declined.
It's that idea of the early mover advantage, right? Because you can't just discount it because it's not big. As we kind of get to the end here, what are you most excited about over the coming year here?
I am most excited about working with organizations to just put the consumer first. E-commerce is such an awesome tool to put the consumer first because we get to talk to the consumer, we get to learn from the consumer, and we get to try things out with the consumer. And I've been working with a couple clients of HHF Strategy lately to build e-commerce capabilities for companies that didn't even think that their revenue model had anything to do with e-commerce or interacting and charging consumers and delivering a product online. I mean, even with recruiting firms, we can build an e-commerce business model into that actually addresses who their consumers are and improves on their ability to deliver on their consumers' need for recruiting service. And I think this year, when you have business challenges, we're always going to have the companies and the brands that pull back and cut. But what you get from that is innovation. And that just doesn't mean product innovation. It means go-to-market innovation. So we can address consumer needs in e-commerce in different ways, try things out. One of the best things you can do when times are going to get rough is take a day off and get a group of people together from all levels of seniority and just have a conversation about where things are going and how we're going to address it. And the challenge leads to opportunity. And if you recognize that, if you take that time, you can figure out the best way to address it. And this goes back to branding days, literally on trying to do really cool Disney stuff on the Pull-Ups brand. We would say, okay, what's our dream execution? Okay, we can't afford that. What's the lo-fi version of that? What's the cheap version of that? Now's a good chance. Look at, you're going to have brands that take the opportunity right now to say, how are we going to do that inexpensively? And they're the ones who a year from now are going to have grown, even though the marketplace has been challenged.
Yeah, I love it. And especially from the standpoint of that's what's happened over the past few years, is the larger organizations who have just let it go by the wayside. And we've seen over and over again, the brands that are willing to go out there and take a chance and go digital first and learn from the customer. They're getting some great dividends right now. It's not getting acquired. And every time I'm talking to large brands, like, we could have done that. We could have done that. Yeah, you had all the manpower. You had everything that you needed, except for the agility to do it. So
exactly.
We just, John, thanks so much for your time today. As always, really enjoy the conversations. Always learn stuff when I chat with you. Everybody, if you want to reach out, HHF Strategy, is that right? HHF Strategy.
Correct.
Reach out to John Feather on LinkedIn. And with that, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Thanks everybody for listening in. Everybody take care, stay safe. Look forward to having you on a future episode. Thanks, John. We'll see you, my friend.